Jasmine Crockett dropped a bomb on live TV directly at Kash Patel. In just 14 seconds, her fiery question, "Safe for who?" tore through Patel's wall of numbers and left the chamber in shock. Patel clung to statistics, but Crockett unleashed chilling truths of lawmakers' families sleeping with guns as death threats mounted. Jim Jordan leapt to protect Patel, his face pale as the cameras zoomed in. What exactly did Jasmine expose that made Jim Jordan so desperate to shield him? Hold tight, what you're about to see could rewrite history before your eyes. The hearing chamber throbbed with an almost electric silence. Every seat was filled, reporters clutching notepads, aides whispering nervously, cameras rolling live to the nation. The witness table glowed under the sharp white lights, isolating the man at its center. Kash Patel, newly sworn FBI director, his posture stiff, his gaze frosted over. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She leaned forward, her hands steady, but her voice carrying the weight of communities ignored. Every movement felt rehearsed by fate, not by script. "Mr. Patel," she began, her tone quiet but searing, "you claim America is safer than ever. I have only one question. Who is it safe for?" Gasps rippled through the room. Aides shifted in their chairs. Patel did not blink. He folded his hands as if statistics could shield him. Jasmine pressed on her words, sharp as broken glass. "Is it safe for the families of representatives who now sleep beside loaded weapons after death threats? Is it safe for judges like Merrick Garland stalked outside their homes? Or perhaps it is only safe for the white supremacists marching openly while this bureau looks away?" Patel's jaw tightened. He spoke with a chilling calm. "Congresswoman, fear is not fact. The bureau's numbers show progress." She snapped back louder. "Now, numbers don't stop bullets. Numbers don't comfort a child in a bomb-threatened school." The camera zoomed closer. America held its breath. Something irreversible had just begun. The words still echoed. "Who is it safe for?" When Jim Jordan sprang from his chair. His face flushed, red veins visible against the bright lights. He jabbed a finger toward Jasmine Crockett, his voice rising like a siren. "This is nothing but theater," he shouted, his tone dripping with contempt. "Congresswoman Crockett isn't asking questions, she's auditioning for primetime TV. The FBI has never been stronger thanks to Director Patel, and yet she plays to the cameras as if the men and women risking their lives are villains." Gasps rustled across the chamber. Some aides lowered their eyes. Others smirked. Jasmine, however, didn't flinch. She leaned back, letting Jordan's fury burn itself out, then struck with precision. Acting, she asked coolly, "Tell that to former Congressman Adam Kinzinger, whose family received death threats so graphic his wife was forced to keep a gun by the bed. Tell that to Liz Cheney, who had to walk through metal detectors in her own district town halls because supporters of your candidate threatened her life." Jordan's jaw clenched. His hands tightened around the edge of the table. Reporters scribbled so fast their pens nearly tore the paper. The hashtag #SafeForWho was already trending online, flooding Twitter feeds with disbelief and anger. Jasmine's voice cut through the tension, deliberate and merciless. "This isn't theater, Congressman. It's blood, fear, and families barricading themselves in their homes, while this bureau hides behind spreadsheets. If telling the truth feels like acting, maybe that says more about you than about me." The chamber fell into a stunned silence. Patel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his mask of calm beginning to slip. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch of his expression. Viewers across the nation could sense it. The confrontation was no longer just about statistics. It was about survival. The chamber still buzzed with the aftershocks of Jasmine's rebuke when Kash Patel finally leaned into his microphone. His tone was deliberate, measured, almost mechanical. "Let me be clear," he began, eyes sweeping across the dais. "Under my leadership, the Bureau has taken down more criminal networks than in the past decade. Drug seizures have doubled. Homicides are down by record margins. We've intercepted child trafficking rings at unprecedented rates. These are not feelings. These are facts." His words cut through the air like cold iron statistical armor meant to shield him from the charge of neglect. Jasmine rose to her feet. Her hands gripped the folder in front of her knuckles, pale, but her voice, though trembling with anger, was sharp and unyielding. "Numbers don't hide the truth," she said. "Black families threatened in their churches, Parliamentarians like Senator Susan Collins receiving bomb threats at their homes, school teachers forced to drill children for active shooters. That is the America people live in. No statistic erases the fear choking our communities every single day. Patel's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. His reply came with chilling detachment. "I don't care what they say about me," he answered flatly. "I care about results. The FBI's job is to deliver security, not to pander to emotions." The words landed like an insult, as though lived terror were nothing more than theatrics. A ripple of shock coursed through the chamber. Reporters glanced at one another, scribbling furiously, sensing history in the making. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locked on him. "If you call fear an emotion, then you have already failed this nation. Because for millions of Americans, fear is not abstract. It's the sound of a gun cocking outside their window." The silence that followed was suffocating. Every camera captured Patel's expressionless face, and every viewer at home could feel it. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. The hearing room's silence shattered as television networks cut abruptly to breaking footage. What America saw was no longer debate. It was a nightmare. On screen, Howard University. Police tape snapped in the wind. Officers in heavy bomb gear crouched beside a cardboard box left outside the library steps. Students were herded into the streets, their faces pale, clutching books, as if they were shields. At Spelman College, the camera caught chaos, sirens, wailing parents sprinting toward campus gates. One mother gripped a reporter's mic with trembling hands and screamed, "Tell Director Patel my daughter was told to hide under a desk while a bomb squad searched her dorm." "Safe for who?" Mr. Patel gasps erupted in the chamber. Jasmine Crockett's eyes locked on Patel. Her voice, slicing through the chaos, piped into the room. "Do you hear them, Mr. Patel, or do you only hear your spreadsheets?" The screen switched to Jackson State. A father held his teenage son, sobbing, his voice hoarse. "I served in Iraq, but I never thought I'd have to teach my boy how to survive a bomb threat in an American classroom." His words echoed across living rooms nationwide. Network anchors filled in the grim backdrop. Over a dozen HBCUs have received coordinated bomb threats in the past year. Federal reports link these incidents to extremist networks. No arrests have been made. Back in the chamber, Jasmine slammed her palm on the desk. 12 schools, hundreds of threats, zero justice. And you sit here bragging about drug seizures while black students pray they don't explode in chemistry class. Patel's face remained rigid, but the cameras caught it, a flicker in his eyes, a crack in the armor. Another clip rolled. Attorney General Merrick Garland in sworn testimony replayed on loop. "The most dangerous domestic threat we face is white supremacist violence." The contrast was devastating. Reporters scribbled furiously. Twitter ignited with a single phrase, "Safe for who?" Inside the hearing, the weight of Jasmine's words thundered louder than sirens. Patel's statistics had just collided with the raw terror of America's classrooms. And for millions watching, the question was no longer rhetorical. It was personal. The television screens didn't go black. Instead, producers rolled another piece of damning footage, this time, not from a college campus, but from the halls of Congress itself. The image was unmistakable. Representative Adam Kinzinger, a Republican once lauded for his military service, standing at a podium, his voice breaking. His resignation speech replayed across every network, words as raw now as the day he delivered them. "My wife has received letters that promised we would both be executed," Kinzinger said, holding up one envelope with trembling fingers. "Strangers called my home, threatened to slit the throat of my newborn son. I've worn a uniform in war zones, but never imagined I'd need to protect my family in my own country. That is why I cannot continue." The hearing chamber froze. Even Jim Jordan sat, rigid, lips pressed tight. Reporters' pens tore across their pads. Jasmine Crockett rose again, eyes burning holes into Patel. "Mr. Patel," she demanded, her tone sharp as a blade. "A Republican, a combat veteran, was driven from Congress because your bureau couldn't stop extremists from hunting his family. Does that sound like a nation that's safer than ever?" Patel shifted, but answered with his trademark frost. "Threats against public officials are unacceptable. The Bureau investigates every case with seriousness." Jasmine's laugh was bitter, almost mocking. "Investigates while a congressman's wife sleeps with a loaded pistol and their infant cries in the next room. While elected officials walk away because the fear is unbearable, your seriousness is hollow, Director. Hollow, gas spread through the chamber like wildfire. The camera zoomed closer, catching Patel's tightening jaw, his hand gripping the edge of the table. Outside, Twitter boiled. Clips of Kinzinger's words ricocheted across feeds under the hashtag #SafeForWho. Ordinary Americans were already asking the same question Jasmine had posed. If a congressman cannot be protected, who can inside the hearing? The silence was suffocating. Crockett leaned closer to the microphone, her final words striking like a hammer. Director Patel, your numbers don't stop death threats. They don't shield children. And they certainly didn't save Adam Kinzinger's family. The room quaked under the weight of her accusation. And for Patel, there was no statistic left to hide behind. The networks pivoted again. The feed shifted from Kinzinger's resignation speech to a live call-in program running parallel with the hearing. Ordinary Americans, shaken by what they were watching, flooded the phone lines. Their voices, unpolished, trembling, furious, became the soundtrack of the nation's reckoning. The first call belonged to a truck driver from Ohio. His voice was steady at first, but the more he spoke, the heavier it became, like gravel sliding down steel. He described the long nights on the interstate headlights stretching into endless dark. He had once worn his union hat proudly, but now he kept it hidden. At a rest stop, a man had followed him into the bathroom, whispering threats about his wife. The words weren't bluster, they came with her work address. I park my rig at night, Mr. Patel, and I don't worry about thieves. I worry about men with ideology and guns. You count seizures. I count the seconds my kids wait by the window, praying I make it home. The second call came from Atlanta. A nurse spoke softly, almost in confession. She recalled the years she spent on the COVID floor, holding hands of patients who never breathed again, working double shifts until her skin ached under the mask. For a while, neighbors called her a hero. Then came the messages, anonymous, cruel, promising to torch her house because she voted. Every buzz of her phone felt like a match being struck. I still wear my scrubs, Director, but now when I leave the hospital, I scan the parking lot, searching for shadows. My patients lived because I stood up for them. And now I wonder who stands up for me. The chamber hung on every word. Jasmine's eyes never left Patel. Her voice broke the silence, each syllable heavy with accusation. These are not actors, Mr. Patel. They are America. And while they fight to stay alive, you fight to protect your image. The cameras froze on Patel's face. For once, even his silence looked like surrender. The hearing chamber was suffocating with silence. Every pen hovered, every camera zoomed closer. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her hand gripping a red folder marked with the black stamp confidential. She slammed it onto the desk. The crack echoed like a gavel. Director Patel, she declared, eyes locked on him. You've hidden this from the American people, but today they will see it. The gallery gasped. The folder was opened and pages rustled under the heat of the lights. Jasmine dragged her finger across a line, her voice slicing through the tension. According to your bureau's own analysis, 70% of all verified threats against elected officials, federal judges and community leaders come from right-wing extremists, not cartels, not foreign terrorists. Right. Here. At home. A murmur thundered through the room. Reporters' pens scratched furiously, and somewhere in the gallery someone whispered, 70%. Jasmine leaned forward, a voice like fire. These aren't numbers on a page. These are bomb threats at Howard University. These are death letters sent to Judge Esther Salas, who buried her son after a gunman stormed her home. These are calls to Congressman Kinzinger promising to slit the throat of his infant child. And yet she turned sharply toward Patel. You tell us America is safer than ever. Patel straightened in his chair, but his lips pressed into a thin line. His silence was damning. Jasmine raised the folder higher, shaking it in the air. This report was sealed, buried. Why? To protect your reputation? To protect the man who appointed you? Or to protect the extremists who are emboldened every time you look the other way? The room erupted with gasps. Jim Jordan half rose from his chair, fists clenched, but Jasmine's voice cut him down before he could speak. Do not call this theater. Do not call this partisan. This is your bureau's handwriting, your signature, your shame. And now the entire nation is watching. All eyes swung back to Patel. For the first time, he looked cornered, his steel mask cracking under the heat of undeniable truth. The chamber was still trembling from Jasmine's revelation when Jim Jordan erupted like a thunderclap. He shot from his chair, fists clenched, face flushed crimson. His voice boomed against the marble walls. "This is a lie, a twisted number cooked up by radicals." His words spat across the chamber. 70% you call patriotic Americans extremists. This is propaganda, pure and simple. The audience gasped. Reporters scribbled so violently their pens nearly tore through paper. Cameras zoomed, capturing every bead of sweat on his forehead. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, her voice cutting through his tirade like a blade. Propaganda. Tell that to Judge Esther Salas, whose son was gunned down on her doorstep. Tell that to Republican Congressman Fred Upton, who read death threats so vile they described his grandchildren hanging from trees. Distorted. These stories are carved into coffins. Jordan slammed his hand on the desk so hard the microphones rattled. You're smearing good Americans. To score points, Director Patel is saving this country. Arrests are up, crime is down. That's the truth. Patel sat rigid, his eyes fixed forward, but his silence screamed louder than Jordan's rage. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice now molten steel. The truth. The truth is mothers at Howard University, waiting outside barricaded halls. The truth is a nurse in Atlanta who sleeps with a bat by her bed. The truth is a veteran who says he felt safer in Afghanistan than in his Arizona hometown. You don't get to shout away the blood on these walls, Congressman. The chamber fell into a deadly hush. Jordan's chest heaved, but no words came. Jasmine delivered the final blow, each word a hammer strike. Numbers don't lie, people do. And today it's clear who's terrified of the facts. Every lens turned toward Patel. The steel mask on his face had cracked. The echoes of Jordan's fury still vibrated in the chamber when Jasmine Crockett straightened her shoulders. The red folder was open before her like a loaded weapon, every page around aimed directly at Kash Patel. Her voice dropped into a deadly calm. You can pound desks, you can scream until your throat tears, but you cannot distort the truth just to protect your faction. The room stiffened. Patel's stare remained fixed, but his jaw tightened, the only betrayal of his composure. Jasmine flipped the report to its centerpiece, her finger pressing down hard on the page. Her voice sharpened into steel. Here it is, black and white. Threat assessment signed by your own counterterrorism unit. 70% traced to right-wing extremists. Not a rumor, not speculation. Verified. The gallery gasped as cameras zoomed in, catching the bold lettering under the seal of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division. She raised the page high for the country to see. This isn't my invention. This is your bureau's handwriting, your analysts, your findings. And you buried it. Reporters' pens scratched like knives. Social media feeds lit up in real time, save for who climbing by the second. Jasmine's tone rose, carrying the pain of every voice silenced outside those marble walls. Judge Esther Salas lost her son to a gunman steeped in hate. Congressman Kinzinger's family lived under threats to slit their throats. Everyday Americans, nurses, veterans, truck drivers are stalked and terrorized. And yet you look this country in the eye and tell them it's safer than ever. Jordan sat frozen. Patel's silence grew heavier by the second, every tick of the clock an indictment. Jasmine delivered the hammer blow. Facts do not bend for politics. Fear cannot be erased by speeches. And truth always bleeds through. No faction, no shield, no director can bury it. The chamber was motionless, but the verdict in the court of public opinion was already sealed. Jasmine didn't sit. She signaled the aides, and the next image burst across the chamber screens. Not a chart, not a statistic, an envelope. Inside it, a single round of ammunition gleamed under the harsh light. She turned to Patel, her voice sharp as glass. Director Patel, this is what one of your colleagues in government received. A bullet, accompanied by the words, "This is for you. Next time it won't be paper." The chamber recoiled, whispers cutting the silence. Jasmine drove the knife deeper. Representative Liz Cheney opened her morning mail to find her life reduced to an object that kills. This isn't online chatter. This isn't theater. This is terror hand-delivered. Patel's expression barely shifted, but the cameras caught the tension in his jaw. He leaned forward slightly as if bracing himself. Jasmine didn't allow him space. She held up a copy of the letter, her hand steady. Your bureau logged this. Your counterterrorism unit confirmed the source. And still you sat in that chair telling America that fear is exaggerated, that extremism is inflated. Her tone rose, each word pounding like a drum. A bullet doesn't lie, Mr. Patel. A bullet doesn't distort. It doesn't care about your graphs or your speeches. It speaks one language only: violence. And that language is being spoken across this country while you look away. The silence in the room was suffocating. Patel remained cold, but his silence felt like retreat. Jasmine's final words cracked through the chamber like thunder. America's lawmakers are receiving bullets in their mail. And you still dare to call this nation safe? The image of the bullet still burned on the screen when Patel finally broke his silence. His voice was measured, but his words dropped like ice. The FBI is doing a good job, he said coldly. We've reduced violent crimes, seized record amounts of narcotics, and dismantled extremist cells before they acted. The Bureau is stronger than it has ever been. The room erupted in murmurs. A bullet on a congresswoman's desk, yet he called it a good job. Jasmine snapped forward, her tone laced with fury. A good job, tell that to Representative Liz Cheney, who held an envelope with a death sentence inside. Tell that to Judge Esther Salas, who buried her only son because a gunman found her family. Tell that to Adam Kinzinger, who left this very Congress because his wife and baby were promised slaughter. Is this your definition of success? Patel's face hardened. No agency can stop every threat. Perfection isn't the measure. Impact is. Arrest, convictions, disruption of networks, that is the standard of progress. Jasmine's laugh cracked like a whip. Progress, Director? Do you think a grieving mother counts your arrests while lowering her child into the ground? Do you think a lawmaker's wife sleeps easier because you brag about seizures? Your numbers are trophies on your wall, while Americans live with guns under their pillows? The chamber froze. The words were so sharp they seemed to draw blood. Patel leaned in, eyes narrowing. You don't understand what it takes to lead a national security agency? Jasmine didn't hesitate. She slammed her hand on the desk. No, Director, you don't understand what it takes to protect a nation? If you cannot defend your own colleagues in this building, how can you defend 330 million citizens outside it? Gasps swept through the gallery. Reporters scribbled like mad, and cameras zoomed in on Patel's face, catching the flicker of something he could no longer hide doubt. The gallery was already on edge when Jasmine Crockett rose from her chair. Her hand slammed the desk so hard the microphone shook, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. Her voice roared across the chamber. If you can't protect my colleagues, how can you protect 330 million people? The words detonated. Reporters froze mid-scribble. Jim Jordan's head snapped toward Patel, searching for a counter that wasn't there. Cameras zoomed in tight on Patel's face, catching the strain tightening around his eyes. Jasmine pressed on, her fury unrelenting. Members of Congress stalked in their own homes. Judges like Esther Salas losing their children to hate-fueled assassins. Colleagues like Adam Kinzinger forced out because his family was hunted. A congresswoman receiving a bullet in the mail. This is not isolated. This is systemic. Patel leaned toward his microphone, his voice flat but brittle. The Bureau is expanding operations, reallocating resources. Reallocating. Jasmine cut him off, her voice sharp enough to pierce stone. You stripped manpower from domestic terror units to play ice on the streets. You hollowed out the very teams designed to stop the bullets, the bombs, the threats. And now you sit there, staring into cameras, telling Americans they are safe. A gasp rippled through the audience. Reporters whispered, exchanging glances. Jasmine raised the confidential report again, holding it like a blade. Your own analysts warned you. 70% of threats traced to right-wing extremists. Signed, dated, verified by your counterterrorism division. And you buried it because it didn't fit your narrative. Patel tried to respond, but Jasmine's voice thundered over him. Don't tell me about resources. Don't tell me about the results. Because while you count arrests, families count graves. While you parade numbers, Americans lock their doors and wonder if they'll live to see morning. The chamber was silent now, but it was the kind of silence that suffocates. Every eye fixed on Patel, whose face was drained of color. Jasmine leaned forward, her final words carved into the air like a verdict. You can lie to yourself, you can lie to your allies, but you cannot lie to America, not when the blood is still fresh. The gavel hadn't fallen yet. The room felt as if judgment had already been delivered. The chamber still vibrated from Jasmine's last strike when Kash Patel finally pushed forward, gripping the microphone as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. His voice came low, measured, but pulsing with defiance. History will prove me right, he said, each syllable drawn out like a challenge. Not this hearing, not the headlines. History. When the dust settles, people will see that under my direction, the Bureau has captured more criminals, dismantled more networks, and saved more lives than any director before me. The words hung heavy, but the room did not shift in his favor. Instead, the gallery stirred with disbelief, reporters trading looks of shock. Jasmine's gaze locked on him, unblinking. Her reply came like a hammer on steel. History. Her voice rose, echoing through the vaulted ceiling. History already speaks, Mr. Patel. It speaks through the graves of children in Buffalo, slaughtered by a white supremacist you refuse to prioritize. It speaks through the silence after the bomb threats at Howard and Spelman. It speaks through the blood on Judge Esther Salas's doorstep. Patel straightened his shoulders, refusing to yield. You cherry-pick tragedies to score points. The broader record, the metrics will vindicate me. History judges results, not emotions. The chamber gasped. His dismissal cut deeper than any denial. Jasmine's voice cracked with fury, trembling but unrelenting. Results tell that to the parents who send their kids to class under the shadow of bomb squads. Tell that to colleagues who wear bulletproof vests to town halls. Tell that to the wife of Congressman Kinzinger, who slept with a gun by her side because anonymous callers promised to murder her baby. That's your record. That's the history you're writing. The screens behind them flashed images compiled by staffers, photographs of evacuation drills at HBCUs, grainy footage of masked men, mailing threats headlines documenting near misses that Patel's bureau had dismissed. Jordan shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched tight, but even he offered no interruption this time. The images spoke louder than his protests. Jasmine leaned closer to her microphone, her words slow, deliberate, devastating. History doesn't wait for spin, Director. History is happening now, and it will not remember your excuses. It will remember your failure. The silence that followed was suffocating. Patel's words still lingered. History will prove me right. But the weight of evidence pressed against him like a verdict already delivered. The words history will prove me right still hung in the chamber when Jasmine Crockett gave a subtle nod to her aides. The screens behind her flickered. The lights dimmed just enough to make the footage command the room. At first static. Then the image sharpened, a pale-faced young man in an orange jumpsuit seated in an interrogation room. His wrists were cuffed to the table. The timestamp in the corner showed it was only weeks old. The audio rolled. His voice was shaky but clear. I did it because I was inspired. Inspired by Trump, by the far right. They told us we were warriors. They told us to fight back. So I did. The chamber froze. Reporters' pens stopped mid-stroke. A gasp escaped from the gallery. Jasmine's voice cut through the silence, calm but deadly. That is not my opinion. That is not speculation. That is a sworn confession from the man who mailed bombs to black colleges last year. On the screen, the extremist continued, his tone chillingly casual. I saw Trump say they're coming for us. I believed him. I wanted to strike first. The FBI wasn't even looking at us. They don't care. So I knew I had time. The camera zoomed in on Patel. His lips pressed together, but the strain was visible. His hand twitched on the table, betraying nerves he tried to mask. Jasmine didn't let him breathe. Your bureau had this video. Your agents interviewed him. He named the ideology. He named the inspiration. And yet not once in your testimony did you acknowledge what is plain, undeniable on tape. Patel leaned into the microphone, his voice low, defensive. We do not politicize investigations. Jasmine slammed her palm down. This is not politics. This is a domestic terrorist under oath, stating he acted because a former president in a far-right movement told him to, and you buried it. The gallery erupted in whispers, reporters already transmitting the footage across networks. On social media, the clip went viral in minutes, hashtags multiplying, confession on tape, safe for who. Jasmine's final words landed like thunder. Director Patel history doesn't have to prove anything. The proof is right here in his own voice, and it damns you more than I ever could. The chamber was silent, but the verdict was deafening. The video faded to black, but the chamber did not stir. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just a silence so thick it pressed on the chest. The only sound was the soft hum of the cameras transmitting every second to millions of homes. Kash Patel sat rigid, his eyes lowered for the first time. The air around him seemed to collapse, the weight of the confession bearing down. Jasmine Crockett remained standing, her frame rigid with defiance, her gaze never leaving him. At the far end of the dais, Jim Jordan flushed crimson. His jaw clenched, then unhinged, as he shot forward, jabbing his finger across the room. This is a setup." His words were muffled, the microphone cutting dead before the sound could reach the record. Confusion rippled. Jordan banged his hand on the desk, his mouth moving furiously, but all the nation saw was a desperate man screaming into silence. Jasmine didn't miss a beat. Her voice filled the void where it should have been. "This is not theater. This is evidence. Evidence your ally hoped would never see daylight." Reporters scribbled wildly, their pens racing to capture every word. Camera flashes popped like lightning, illuminating Patel's pale face. Jordan turned to the chairman, demanding to be heard, but the chairman only shook his head. The microphone remained cold, lifeless. The symbolism was undeniable. The louder he flailed, the less he mattered. Jasmine leaned toward her mic, her tone low but merciless. "You see, Director Patel, even your defenders can't drown out the truth." The American people heard that tape. They saw his face. They know exactly what inspired him, and they know what you refused to say. Patel shifted, his silence more damning than any admission. The chamber sat frozen, history being carved in real time. What began as testimony had turned into an indictment, and there was no script left to follow. The silence from Jordan's muted microphone still lingered when Jasmine Crockett reached for another stack of papers. This time, no red folder, instead a manila file thick with printed emails. The label on the cover read simply, "Internal FBI Communications." The air stiffened. Every head in the chamber tilted forward. Reporters raised their cameras again, ready. Jasmine's tone was calm, but the edge of her words could slice steel. "We've heard numbers. We've seen a confession. Now let's look at your own house, Director Patel." She opened the file and pulled out the first sheet. Projected instantly onto the massive screens was an email dated March 15, 2022 from an assistant director in the Counterterrorism Division. The subject line, "Urgent budget cuts to domestic extremism unit." Her voice rang out as she read. "Director Patel reallocating $12 million from the Domestic Extremism Task Force will cripple ongoing investigations. This unit is already understaffed and facing unprecedented caseloads." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Jasmine lifted another page, her voice unflinching. "We cannot ensure timely response to threats against members of Congress or federal judges if these cuts proceed." Signed, Assistant Director Thomas T. Cullen. Patel shifted uncomfortably, the first flicker of movement breaking his stoic mask. Jasmine slammed the page onto the desk. $12 million ripped from the only unit standing between extremist violence and this Congress. And where did it go? Director immigration raids, street-level stunts, optics for television cameras while lawmakers buried their children. The projection changed to another email dated April 2022. The words were blistering. "Sir, this decision is indefensible. It directly endangers members of Congress. Please reconsider." The sender, Deputy Director Paul Abate. Gasps swept through the room. Patel's own deputies had begged him to stop. Jasmine leaned closer to her microphone, her tone rising like a storm. "You were warned by your own people, by your own deputies. You ignored them. And now you sit here talking about results?" Patel finally spoke. His voice strained. "These reallocations were strategic." "Strategic?" Jasmine cut him off, her voice exploding across the chamber. "Strategic is protecting the government from domestic terrorists, not diverting funds to photo-op operations on the border. Strategic is listening to the experts who told you this decision would cost lives. But you didn't care, did you, Director? Because acknowledging the real threat meant crossing the allies you serve." The words landed like punches. Patel's face, once stone, now cracked with tension. The silence of the chamber was broken only by the frantic scratching of pens and the shutter clicks of cameras. Jasmine lifted the final page, her hands steady, her voice thundering. The emails don't lie. Your staff begged you. You ignored them. And Americans paid the price. The projection froze on Patel's name in the email thread, illuminated under the harsh chamber lights. For the first time, he looked less like a director and more like a defendant. The final email still glowed on the screen, Patel's name burned into the record. The room was thick with tension when a voice rose from the press gallery. It was veteran reporter Andrea Mitchell, her hands trembling as she held a printed page high. "Madam Chair," she asked, her voice steady, despite the weight of the moment. "May I read this into the record?" The gavel struck once. Permission granted. Mitchell stepped to the center aisle, unfolding the paper with care. Her voice echoed across the chamber internal memorandum, June 2022. Subject evidence of deliberate evasion. Summary: Director Patel knowingly misrepresented budget reallocations in testimony before this committee. Records show funds intended for counter-extremism were redirected despite warnings that such action endangered congressional safety. The words detonated. A collective gasp surged through the gallery. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, eyes blazing. Deliberate evasion, not oversight, not error, a choice, a cover-up. The cameras swung to Patel. He opened his mouth, but his voice faltered. I acted within administrative discretion. Those decisions were necessary." Necessary, Jasmine snapped, her voice laced with fury. Necessary to lie to Congress. Necessary to strip the very unit tasked with stopping extremists. Necessary to tell the American people one story while your inbox told another. The reporter pressed on, her tone relentless. The memo further states, Director Patel prioritized optics over operational safety, knowingly endangering federal officials and dismissing repeated internal objections. Reporters scribbled furiously. Phones lit up as hashtags multiplied. Deliberate evasion, Patel files. Patel shifted in his seat, his mask of composure fracturing under the glare of evidence. His fingers tapped nervously against the table, a subtle drumbeat of unease. Jasmine struck again. Assistant Director Thomas Cullen warned you. Deputy Director Paul Abbott begged you. And now an internal memo confirms what we suspected. You didn't just fail. You covered your tracks. This wasn't mismanagement. This was deception. Patel's voice cracked. The Bureau has broad discretion. Jasmine slammed the desk, silencing him. Not when lives are at stake. Not when bullets arrive in mailboxes. Not when extremists roam free because the man at the top chose to protect himself instead of the people. The chamber fell silent, every word reverberating like a verdict. Patel's face was pale, his authority eroded by the weight of documents, confessions, and now the voice of the press reading his betrayal into history. Jasmine's final words cut through the suffocating quiet. You didn't just evade responsibility, Director Patel. You evaded the truth. And tonight the truth has caught you. The gavel never struck yet. The sound of judgment was deafening. Kash Patel sat frozen, the damning memo still projected above his head, its language branded into the record evidence of deliberate evasion. His lips parted, then closed again. No defense came. Not a word. The silence itself was testimony. The chamber buzzed with unease, reporters leaning forward like hunters circling prey. The only sound was the faint tapping of Patel's fingers against the polished desk, a nervous rhythm he couldn't suppress. Then in a burst of motion, Jim Jordan rose. His chair screeched against the marble floor, the noise slicing through the stillness. His voice, raw and frantic, cracked across the chamber. This is a witch hunt. He doesn't have to answer this circus. This entire hearing is nothing but a staged ambush by Democrats. But the microphones betrayed him, again cut to silence. His mouth moved, his finger jabbed at Jasmine. His fist slammed against the table. Yet all the nation saw was desperation on mute. And then the cameras betrayed him too. Without warning, every network feed cut to a close-up of his face. His cheeks blotched, crimson sweat pooling at his temples. The veins on his neck bulged as he shouted into dead air. Millions of viewers watched every twitch, every stuttered breath. He looked less like a defender and more like a man cornered by truth. Jasmine remained still, her expression calm, almost surgical. She did not raise her voice. She did not even look at Jordan. Her eyes stayed fixed on Patel, the man who now seemed to shrink under the glare of the spotlight. Director Patel, she said, her words deliberate, slow, merciless. You don't need Jim Jordan to shout for you. You don't need excuses or interruptions. You need only one thing, the truth. And right now your silence is the loudest truth in this room. The words sliced through the chamber. The gallery gasped audibly. Reporters scribbled with furious energy pens, nearly tearing their notepads. Social media feeds erupted. Silent Patel Jordan unplugged. Jordan continued to thrash against the silence, his lips spitting words no one could hear. The chairman shook his head, refusing to restore his mic. The symbolism was stark. The louder he screamed, the more irrelevant he became. The camera returned to Patel. The close-up was merciless, zooming tight on the twitch of his eyelid, the pallor creeping into his skin. He was no longer the director of the FBI in that moment. He was simply a man unmasked, cornered, and defeated by his own refusal to speak. Jasmine's voice landed the final strike heavy as a gavel. America deserves to see this. A director who hides from the truth. An ally who cannot be heard in a chamber that will not look away. The silence that followed was suffocating, yet it was the silence of judgment, not mercy. The image of Patel's silent face still lingered on screens when America erupted. Within hours, every major network had seized the footage. CNN replayed the clip on loop, the camera's merciless zoom on Patel's twitching eye filling the screen like an X-ray of guilt. The chyron beneath screamed FBI Director silent under fire. On MSNBC, anchors spoke with grave tones. Rachel Maddow's voice carried the weight of history. This is the most devastating collapse of credibility I've ever seen in a public hearing. Silence is not neutrality, it's surrender. Fox News, meanwhile, framed the moment as a partisan ambush. Tucker Carlson's replacement thundered. This was a show trial. They muted Jim Jordan. They ambushed Patel with cherry-picked documents, and they call it accountability. This is nothing but political theater. The split was stark. By nightfall, hashtags warred across platforms. Silent Patel trended alongside Witch Hunt, each side clawing at the other in digital combat. On CNN's panel, former FBI counterintelligence chief Frank Figliuzzi leaned forward, shaking his head. The emails are real. The memo is real. Patel starved the counter-extremism unit while threats skyrocketed. That's not politics, that's negligence. But over on Fox, Congressman Matt Gaetz shot back, his face red with fury. Negligence. No, this is about Democrats weaponizing fear. They hate Trump, so they smear anyone connected to him. Patel is their latest target. The public split mirrored the broadcasts. In coffee shops from Ohio to Georgia, the confrontation became the only topic. Some spoke of Jasmine Crockett as a warrior for truth, finally exposing rot at the core of power. Others fumed that she was grandstanding, humiliating a man they viewed as a patriot. Cable news producers smelled blood. By morning, Patel's frozen silence and Jordan's muted outrage were replayed in side-by-side montages. MSNBC ran the footage of Jordan's lips moving in desperation, his soundless fury ridiculed with captions like, "Louder than words." On CNN, Don Lemon held up a still shot of Jasmine's finger, jabbing the air, her eyes locked on Patel. "This is the moment accountability looked him in the face and he blinked," he said. Meanwhile, Fox plastered a different image. Jordan's reddened face, fists pounding, framed with the caption, "They tried to silence him." The public consumed it all, rage feeding rage. Pollsters recorded a sharp divide, half the nation convinced Patel had been caught in a cover-up, the other half certain the hearing was a staged crucifixion. Back in the hearing room, Patel remained silent, refusing interviews. His stillness was now America's obsession. Jasmine's words from the chamber replayed endlessly across networks. "You don't need allies. You need the truth, and your silence is the loudest truth of all." By dawn, the echo of Patel's silence had left the walls of Congress and spilled into the streets. Outside the Hoover building, a sea of people pressed against barricades, their voices pounding like war drums. Hand-painted banners swayed above the crowd. "Safe for who?" the words glared in black and red, defiant against the gray Washington sky. The chants rolled like thunder. "Safe for who? Safe for who?" Each repetition grew louder, shaking the pavement beneath their feet. Television crews swarmed the plaza. CNN's live Chiron read protests ignite outside FBI headquarters. MSNBC captured the trembling hands of an elderly woman gripping a sign. My grandson deserves to live without fear. Fox News framed it as chaos, calling it the left's manufactured outrage. But the images told their own story. A teacher from Baltimore shouted into a microphone thrust before her face. I've had threats emailed to my school account because I spoke about racism in class. They said they'd come for me, and nothing happened. The FBI told me to stay alert. Stay alert. I sleep with my phone clutched in my hand. Nearby, a black veteran raised his voice steady but fierce. I fought overseas. I bled for this flag. And when my family was threatened for the signs in our yard, I called for help. No one came. Don't tell me America's safe. Not when hate mail arrives faster than backup. The crowd roared in response, their anger feeding itself wave after wave. Inside the FBI building, blinds were drawn silhouettes faintly visible behind the windows. Patel had not appeared. His silence, once contained in the hearing room, now spilled into the streets like gasoline on fire. Jasmine Crockett's words echoed on megaphones carried by protesters. If you can't protect my colleagues, how can you protect 330 million people? The phrase became a chant rattling against the concrete walls. Reporters noted the diversity of the crowd: students, clergy, nurses, still in scrubs, even retired judges. Former U.S. District Judge Nancy Gertner was spotted in the crowd, her voice hoarse as she declared, "Silence in the face of extremism is complicity." Patel must answer. The FBI plaza was a boiling point. Police formed lines, but there was no violence, only voices relentless and united. Cameras zoomed in on a banner held high above the massive bodies. Its letters were bold, its message unflinching. America is not safe until the truth is spoken. For every chant, Patel's silence grew heavier. The protest wasn't just about one director. It was about the question Jasmine had asked, the question haunting the nation. Safe for who? And as night fell with floodlights illuminating the faces of the crowd, the answer was still missing. The silence from the FBI headquarters was the loudest sound in Washington. By the second morning of protest, Washington was no longer just a city under tension. It was a city under siege by questions. Safe for who banners still waved outside FBI headquarters, but now the storm had reached the Hill itself. News alerts blared across every network. CNN announced lawmakers demand additional hearings on Patel. MSNBC's Chiron was sharper calls for resignation mount. Even Fox, careful to defend him the day before now, admitted pressure builds on FBI director after explosive testimony. Jasmine Crockett's confrontation had split the country, but Patel's silence had united something far more dangerous: doubt. Members of both parties whispered in corridors, aides traded frantic emails, and the speaker's office confirmed what the crowd already suspected: Patel would be called back. This time the questions would not be gentle. Yet the spotlight was no longer his alone. Jim Jordan, who had leapt to defend Patel in the chamber, found himself drowning under a different tide. The mute button that silenced his microphone had transformed into a symbol. On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow replayed the footage in slow motion, Jordan red-faced, pounding the desk, his words swallowed by silence. Her commentary was brutal. The man who tried to shout down the truth was silenced not by Democrats, but by reality itself. On CNN, Anderson Cooper hosted a panel dissecting Jordan's defense. Former federal prosecutor Preet Bharara didn't mince words. He wasn't defending Patel. He was defending the indefensible. And the American people saw it. Even conservative voices wavered. Brett Baier on Fox asked bluntly, why was Jim Jordan more focused on silencing Crockett than demanding answers from the director of the FBI? The criticism metastasized online. Hashtags multiplied. Mute Jordan, hear Patel, safe for who? Memes flooded Twitter and TikTok, showing Jordan screaming into dead air, while captions mocked when lies have no mic. Meanwhile, Patel stayed hidden. The FBI press office released a terse statement. Director Patel will cooperate with all further inquiries. But the phrasing only fueled suspicion. Cooperating was not the same as explaining. On Capitol Hill, the Judiciary Committee prepared its summons. Staffers worked late into the night drafting subpoenas, pulling every document tied to Patel's reallocations, his communications, his internal warnings. The scope widened by the hour. Jasmine Crockett, walking past a swarm of reporters, said only one sentence. Her tone was razor sharp. This is no longer about politics. This is about survival. Her words looped through evening broadcasts. Survival of lawmakers, of judges, of the nation's credibility itself. By nightfall, the headlines converged. Patel would face another hearing. Jim Jordan would not escape scrutiny either. For once, the hunter of hearings had become the hunted. The hearing chamber had emptied, but the echoes lingered. Patel's silence, Jordan's fury, Jasmine Crockett's words seared into the record. Washington buzzed with speculation about the next move. Yet when Jasmine returned to her office, she walked into something she hadn't expected, something heavier than politics. Her desk was buried. Stacks of envelopes poured from cardboard boxes, letters arriving faster than her staff could sort them. They spilled across the floor, fanned out like a tide pressing against the walls. Her aide whispered almost in disbelief, "Congresswoman, we've counted more than 7,000 since last night. They keep coming." Jasmine picked one at random. The paper trembled in her hand, not from weakness, but from the weight of the words inside. It was from a single mother in Detroit. "I tuck my kids in at night, then sit by the door with a kitchen knife. You were the first person I heard say what I've felt for years, that this country isn't safe for us. Thank you for speaking the truth." Jasmine laid it down carefully, then reached for another. This one was from a veteran in Texas, handwriting jagged but strong. "I served 2 tours in Iraq. I came home thinking the battlefield was behind me. Then my family was threatened for putting up a yard sign. Director Patel said America is safer. I don't believe him, but I believe you." Her chest tightened. The letters were not statistics, not memos, not evidence projected on screens. They were blood and bone, fear and survival etched in ink. On her desk lay another envelope marked with the seal of an Ohio school district. She opened it slowly. Inside was a note from a white teacher. "My students are Black, Latino, Muslim, poor and proud. I've watched parents cry when bomb threats shut down our school. I am not a target, but my kids are. And that makes me one too. You spoke for us. Don't stop." The words blurred for a moment as Jasmine's eyes stung. She closed them, hearing the voices of those who had written as though they filled the room with her. Outside her office, cameras still prowled. Reporters shouted about hearings, about Patel, about Jordan. But inside, Jasmine realized the real trial was not happening under marble ceilings. It was happening in living rooms, classrooms, kitchens across a fractured country. She read another letter. This one is short, unsigned. "I'm alive because you gave me courage to call the police. I had been silent too long. Thank you." The silence in her office was heavy, but it wasn't suffocating like the chamber had been. It was the silence of people reaching for hope. Her aide entered again, holding a fresh stack. "They're still coming, Congresswoman. Every hour, veterans, teachers, clergy, parents. They're calling you, their voice." Jasmine pressed her hand against the pile, grounding herself. For every email Patel had buried, there were thousands of Americans who refused to be silenced. She whispered almost to herself, "This isn't about me. It's about them." The camera of history had shifted. It was no longer zoomed on Patel's twitching face or Jordan's mute outrage. It was now locked on the letters, on the flood of testimony that came not from politicians or agents, but from ordinary people who lived with fear every day. As the evening sun bled through her office windows, Jasmine stood taller, the letters spread before her like evidence in a trial that would never end. She knew the next hearing was coming. Patel would be dragged back, Jordan would rage again, networks would circle like vultures. But Jasmine now carried something stronger than subpoenas or headlines. She carried the voices of a nation demanding to be heard. The chamber was packed tighter than ever. Rows of cameras bristled from every angle, red lights glowing like unblinking eyes. Every network, every outlet, every phone in America seemed tuned to this moment. The hush before Jasmine Crockett spoke was electric, as if the air itself held its breath. She stood slowly, a stack of letters pressed to her chest. They weren't props, they were proof testimony, written in ink by people who lived what Patel dismissed. She walked to the microphone, set the letters down, and let her hand linger there for a beat. Her voice, when it came, was steady but sharp enough to cut through steel. "Over the last week, I have received thousands of letters. From single mothers who guard their children's doors at night with kitchen knives. From veterans who fought in foreign wars only to fear their own neighborhoods. From teachers in Ohio whose classrooms are evacuated by bomb threats. These are not statistics. These are lives. The chamber remained frozen. Patel sat stiffly, his eyes locked forward, but the cameras magnified every twitch in his jaw. Jasmine's tone rose. Director Patel has told us again and again that America is safer. But safer for who? Not for the mother in Detroit. Not for the veteran in Texas. Not for the teacher in Ohio. Safety has become a privilege for the few, while fear has become the daily companion of millions. She lifted a letter, the handwriting jagged but legible. This one is from a grandmother in Georgia. She writes, "I keep a shotgun by my bed. I never wanted to live this way. My country has abandoned me." Jasmine lowered the page, her eyes never leaving Patel. "How dare you tell her she's safe?" Reporters scribbled furiously. The gallery leaned forward, faces tight with anticipation. Her voice thundered now, her cadence deliberate, unrelenting. "We heard the confession on tape. We saw the bullet in the mail. We read the memos from your own deputies. And yet, Mr. Patel, you chose silence. You chose evasion. You chose to bury the truth." Patel shifted his fingers, tapping nervously against the desk, but no words came. Jasmine leaned closer to the microphone, her tone molten. "Safety is not a gift you bestow, Director. Safety is not a privilege granted to a chosen few. Safety is a fundamental right of every citizen. Black or white Democrat or Republican immigrant or native-born, every American deserves to live free from terror." The words detonated. A gasp swept through the audience. CNN cut to a split screen of Jasmine's face and Patel's blank stare. On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow's live commentary whispered, "This is history." Jasmine pressed harder, her voice breaking with both fury and grief. "And when you strip resources from those tasked to defend us, when you hide reports, when you silence the truth, you don't just fail your job, you betray the oath you swore. You betray every citizen who believes this flag still means protection." She raised the stack of letters high, the pages fanned out like wings. "These are the voices of America. They will not be silenced. They will not be told they are safe when their children hide under desks. They will not accept lies dressed as statistics." For a moment, the entire chamber seemed suspended in time. Patel sat rigid. Jordan stared down at his desk. The chairman froze with his gavel in hand. Then Jasmine delivered her closing line, every syllable hammered into history. "Safety is not a privilege. It is the birthright of every citizen. And until this government honors that truth, there will be no peace in these halls, no silence in these streets, and no hiding place for those who fail us." The words echoed off the marble walls, carried beyond the cameras, beyond the headlines. It was not just a speech, it was an indictment, a promise, a warning. The gavel struck, but it sounded less like order and more like the tolling of a bell. Patel had no words left. Jasmine had spoken for a nation. When Jasmine's last words struck the chamber, the silence did not last. At first it was a murmur, soft gasps, stifled cries. Then it grew into something tidal. The audience rose to their feet. Reporters who had come armed with pens and cynicism found themselves wiping tears from their eyes. Some lawmakers, hardened by decades of politics, bowed their heads overcome. On camera, the nation saw what no statistic could measure: grief and hope colliding in real time. A veteran seated in the gallery pressed his hands against his face. "She spoke for me," he whispered, barely audible, yet caught by the hot mic of a nearby journalist. His words swept across television screens before he even knew they had left his lips. In another corner, a teacher clutched the hand of her daughter. Both were crying openly. Kash Patel, still seated at the witness table, stared into the flood of emotion like a man stranded on a shrinking island. He shuffled his papers, adjusted his tie, anything to avoid the lenses trained mercilessly on him. But there was no hiding. The silence he had chosen days before now felt like a confession stamped in permanent ink. The gavel struck, but it could not silence the tremor. The hearing ended, yet the moment had only begun. Within hours, America split into two furious halves. On CNN, the panel called it a moral reckoning. Anderson Cooper replayed Jasmine's words. "Safety is not a privilege. It is the birthright of every citizen." His voice broke slightly as he asked viewers, "How do you argue against that?" On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow went further. This wasn't just oversight. This was betrayal. Patel's silence was the silence of complicity. Fox News countered with fire. Their Chiron blaze Democrats exploit. Fear to attack FBI. Commentators accused Jasmine of staging the tears of orchestrating a media ambush. Yet even as they shouted the footage of the crying veteran, the sobbing teacher, the chant of Safe For, who played on loop. Across kitchen tables and factory floors, the argument spread. In diners in Ohio, farmers in Kansas, barbershops in Detroit, everywhere people argued. Was Jasmine a hero who exposed the rot at the heart of power, or a politician weaponizing tragedy? But one sentence began to rise above the noise. Her final warning replayed endlessly on every network. If we don't dare to call the truth right, we will lose the soul of America. It was not delivered as a flourish. It was not shouted. It was spoken like a verdict, calm and merciless, and it cut through partisanship like a knife. In the gallery footage, you could see it land. A young congressional aide clasped his mouth, trembling. A judge who had come as a guest leaned forward, eyes wet. On social media, the words were printed on banners, retweeted across divides, debated on podcasts from left to right. The soul of America began to trend. Outside the Hoover Building, protesters took up the phrase, chanting it beneath the stone walls that had once felt impenetrable. The soul of America. The soul of America. For Patel, it was the final fracture. Members of the committee confirmed off camera that new hearings would not just summon him, they would demand his resignation. Jordan, too, now faced his own reckoning, the muted image of his desperate shouting replayed until it became satire, then shame. But for Jasmine, the weight was different. She returned to her office once more, greeted by new stacks of letters, veterans, teachers, grandmothers. Each one proof that her words had struck where Patel's silence had failed. The chamber had been her battleground. The cameras had been her weapon. But the letters were her shield. She whispered the line again, this time to herself, the steadiest prayer. If we don't dare to call the truth right, we will lose the soul of America. And outside, across a divided, wounded, but still listening nation, millions heard it echo. What we've seen reminds us of one truth: silence in the face of fear is never safety. Courage begins when ordinary people dare to speak up, even when it shakes the room. Jasmine's fight is not hers alone. It is the fight of every parent, every worker, every neighbor who wants to live without fear. So what truth in your own life do you need the courage to say out loud? This video is created for educational and inspirational purposes, under fair use, not to defame or attack any individual. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. It means the world. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share so more voices can join this journey. Until next time, stay strong, stay awake, and I'll see you in the next video.